We can be very critical of the academy, but it's basically all we got at this point.
Yeah.
You know, there isn't much more. Now, what is valuable to us is when the academy can be self-reflexive. Now, this would give us incredible value, I believe. When the academy itself could be self-reflexive to point out its own weaknesses and its own prejudices and its own assumptions. Now this, I think, would be very valuable to us, but there's not a lot of that going on. I would say the major amount of that is probably in the some of the post-structuralists in Europe, Derrida, Foucault, Husserl, Gadamer, and so forth. These are probably some of the more self-reflexive things. And what would be interesting, and what I intend to get into with all of you, is bringing together these sort of two sides, these two sides of thinking. One side of thinking that looks at another culture, and the other side of thinking that looks at looking at another culture. This is something that is very necessary, because our oral traditions and the people that are teaching on the basis of knowledge received in a non-literary, non-academic sense, there's very, very few of these people. Most of the people that I highly respect in this field are, in fact, academics. So I may criticize the academic approach, the privileging of the printed and published text and so forth, but at the same time, I certainly recognize the discipline involved and the value that they create also. I have some questions. Lakshmanju apparently said in the book Shiva Sutras of Supreme Awakening, before I was concerned that the tradition understanding would be lost with my passing from this world. Now, however, because there are audio recordings of my teachings, I am hoping that the true understanding of Kashmiri will be preserved and not be lost.
Yes, I found that just now. I'm curious about if there are audio recordings of these teachings in speaking.
Yeah.
Is that different than having it in writing? Now, if someone would type down his teachings, what's the difference?
It's different.
That and actually
It's different than it is in writing, but it still doesn't go back and address the necessities of an oral tradition. I think it's good to be able to see somebody on video and hear somebody's voice and hear somebody explaining something, but it's also subject to a great deal of misinterpretation, and I think that what we need is we really need people to connect with each other. That I think that actually video, even though it seems to connect us well, we can hear each other's voice, we can see each other's expressions, which we can't do when we read a book. Somehow, I feel that the video is even further than the printed and published text from the original oral tradition.
Well, I suppose what I was asked was about the last thing that you mentioned when last we met was about precision
Yeah.
in working with the syllable. And so what I was interested in was, since that seems to be a key feature of sacred speech, to preserve its power through right pronunciation. The question that I was asking had to do with whether, since the world is constituted by sacred speech, is it damaged by inappropriate misuses of speech?
Absolutely. 1,000%. Yes. This is the reason why we're having this class. This is what this is ultimately all about. That we can see what the misuse of speech brings about. It brings about destruction, the loss of prosperity, ignorance, and suffering. We can see that clearly, I think. And when we discuss Orwell, Orwell goes on and on and on about this. And how, when we take the profane, I'll use the word profane as an opposite to sacred, when we take the profane speech of the marketplace, whether it's the marketplace of things, ideas, or politics, when we take the profane speech into our own speech, it destroys our relationships, it can destroy our prosperity, and it can affect our lives in a big way. So this is a major point about speech, and why it behooves us as individuals, as collectives, and as an entire planet to honor speech and to use this sort of God-given gift to create prosperity, balance, and happiness. That's ultimately what we're doing, what this is all about. We're not involved in an academic or philosophical discussion here. We're looking for ways to create balance and happiness in ourselves and in the world. Period.
Well, then the related question that's also in what I sent, the text that I sent originally on the 25th of June. Since all of our discussion is organized around the Sanskrit grammarians, and this may be something that you commented on during my regretted but necessary absence, does this only apply to Sanskrit? I mean, if what we're going to be learning is the very syllables that constituted the world and continue to constitute the world in some way, are the reflections of the grammarians equally applicable to, say, speakers of English working with English?
Well, of course, this is a matter of speculation.
Or German, or what have you.
Right. I understand where you're going with that, because this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And obviously, there is a certain degree of speculation in that. But what I would say...
Are we still connected?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear both.
Now, first of all, the reason that we're using Sanskrit is because it's the only language that I know of that has this succinct meta-language and tradition of commentary attached to it. That if we're going to explore speech and grammar and so forth, then the Sanskrit grammarians are by far the major contributors to this. If there was such a tradition in another culture, for sure that, use that as well. Now, my thinking is that you can't directly apply the specifics of what we know in Sanskrit. But when we look at process, and you see that I'm continually referring to application and process. When we look at the process, when we look at the way that we look at Sanskrit, the way that we break it up, and now we look at our own language or another language, using that same kind of process, then we discover some very, very interesting things. I know that it was my study of Sanskrit that actually made me much more interested in my own native American English. At one point, I decided to study French for a couple months, and I took all my notes in Hindi because because Hindi and Sanskrit have given me a way of looking at speech and its rules and infrastructure, so that when I was looking at French, I found it more useful to use Hindi than to use English to find that structure and that application of the French language. So,
If you may interrupt, Balaji.
yeah.
My point is, in everyday life, the language that I'm speaking to myself and the language that I'm using to address other people is English. And so apart from working with mantras, I'm not working with Sanskrit. So again, I want to understand, and without hurrying you in the unfolding of this understanding that you're presenting us, are we going to learn to use the very sacred syllables in order to achieve the best possible outcomes in the world, in world creating? Or are we going to learn principles that can be applied to everyday life speech, whatever language we use?
Yes, well, I think it has to be whatever language we use. I think that if we're just doing this in Sanskrit, then it's a game. It's a useless exercise. I think that if it doesn't come back to our native languages, whether it's German or Norwegian or English or whatever, then it's a futile exercise. Of course we want to apply it to our own language. We're speaking in our own languages now. You know, we're not speaking in Sanskrit. We're using Sanskrit because it's there, and because it has this kind of precision, and it has this kind of commentary that I don't know exists anywhere else. I mean, certainly in the West, there has been nobody that has thought about speech like the Indian grammarians until the last 100 years or so. Before that, nobody had anywhere near the sophistication of the Indian grammarians. So this is why we're using Sanskrit, because we can. It's there and we have access to it. But I don't want to make you Sanskritists. We'll sign off now. Om Namo Narayan. I wish all of you a wonderful week, and be happy, and see you soon. Om Namo Narayan.